Hey, deserving listeners, Will Smith published his apology to Chris Rock regarding the slap during the Oscar ceremony earlier this year, and I thought I would analyze it. Coincidentally, I've been working on a deep dive on apology. I've been reading all the research, and really I've been thinking about apologies, effective apologies, for decades as a couples therapist. It often comes up in session, and so I thought I would analyze his apology. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Let's see what happens. All right, so right off the bat, he's saying, it's been a minute. Over the last few months, I've been doing a lot of thinking and personal work, okay?
Why didn't you apologize to Chris in your acceptance speech? I was fogged out by that point. It's all fuzzy.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt that. The way that he was coming across when he sat down, particularly, and he was yelling, you know, get my wife's name out of your effing mouth. He did not look like himself. He didn't look regulated. He looked quite distressed. I've seen that look in a lot of clients that I work with, and it's usually because they are filled with adrenaline. And we have that adrenaline rush when we feel there's a threat. Now, he was the one who was violent, but I think he did that because he felt threatened somehow. Not that that makes it okay. It was, in my estimation, based on what I understand, even given the background information, completely not okay that he did that. My hypothesis about what happened, I don't know if it's true, is based on his own book, excerpts from his book, and also interviews that he's given about his childhood that involved witnessing domestic violence in his house. He saw his father being quite violent with his mother, and he felt responsible, as a lot of children will tragically feel responsible, even though it's not their fault, but they will feel like it's their fault, and they'll feel like, if only I were stronger, if only I were braver. You know, it's traumatic to begin with, to watch your mom being beaten by your dad. It's very distressful, of course, but he had an additional layer of trauma to it, which was that he blamed himself and he thought he was a coward, that he was weak for not sticking up to his dad and protecting his mom. And that trauma persisted throughout his life, meaning that he was constantly internally beating himself up for being weak and being a coward and not sticking up for people in his life. And I'm sure there have been many moments where he's been triggered throughout his adult life. So Chris Rock says the joke about Jada Pinkett Smith. Will Smith initially kind of laughs about it. I don't know if it's a courtesy laugh or he actually thinks it's funny. He looks over at his wife and she's kind of rolling her eyes. She's not laughing. She seems like she's hurt, and that triggers him, right? It's an exact replica of what happened when he was a child. Not an exact replica, but it emulates it. He has that triggered. He has that massive adrenaline rush, perhaps a PTSD type reaction, a relational PTSD, complex PTSD reaction. And he enters into what one might call a fog. When we have a fight or flight reaction, our body goes through a number of changes, because when we are trying to run from a predator, for example, 200,000 years ago, we didn't have to think about complicated things. We just had to see the threat and either fight it or run. And so blood flow and oxygen would go to muscles, would go to parts of the brain that are responsible for movement and reaction and eyesight and that sort of thing. And our prefrontal cortex in the front of our brain, which is responsible for decision making and coordinating a lot of different emotions and evaluating things, that gets less oxygen because it doesn't need the oxygen, because we don't need to think about complicated things in order to get away from a tiger, right? So we have that reaction, we have all this adrenaline, and our muscles are ready to go and our heart rate's going up and we're breathing fast, but we can't actually make decisions. We can't think through what is the best course of action. And this is why we need a safety plan in place in order to cope with this, that we automatically engage in, so we don't actually do things like what he did. Some people will say they see red or something like so. So he stands up, slaps, sits down. He's still in that state. He's yelling at him. And at some point he's looking back. He's thinking, what did I do? That was not okay. I'm guessing that's what he's referring to here. Now, maybe I'll have a different opinion. Maybe you think Will Smith is a terrible human being and he absolutely knew what he was doing, but I don't think so.
I've reached out to Chris, and the message that came back is that he's not ready to talk, and when he is, he will reach out. So I will say to you, Chris, I apologize to you. My behavior was unacceptable.
Okay, so now that he's getting into his apology, I thought we would analyze his apology. So in my review of the literature on apologies and the psychological literature, authors will come up with components of effective apologies. What is an effective apology? Well, in general, it depends on the situation, but often it involves the victim feeling satisfied with the apology. I decided after really going in depth in the literature to come up with my own list because none of the lists really satisfied me, really seemed to fit how I saw apologies clinically. And so I came up with this list, 10 components of effective apology. Number 1 is to accurately and fully acknowledge the transgression, meaning I did this to you. Number 2 is accurately and fully acknowledge the harm that the transgression caused. I did this to you and it caused this harm to you. Number 3 is take responsibility for the transgression. I was the one who did it. I don't have an excuse. No one forced me to do it, that kind of thing. Number 4, to sincerely express guilt, regret, shame, and or remorse, meaning that you say, I feel bad for doing that to you. Number 5 is explain why it happened without making excuses. For example, if you're Will Smith, you're not saying, well, you shouldn't have said that joke, so I'm sorry, right? That's not really taking responsibility, right? You're making excuses. To take responsibility and to provide an explanation might be something like, I have traumas in my life from my childhood that got triggered in the moment. It by no means justifies what I did, but I took that action. I was in a fog. I don't know why I did it. It was this temporary 10-second span of time that I don't know what sort of person came out of me. I'm not making excuses. It's my fault. I did it. I need to work on it. So the reason why you want to have the explanation is because, one, if you have that explanation, it means you've actually given it some thought. You might have even gone to therapy for it, right? And discovered how it was that you committed that transgression. Because to just say you're sorry is nice, but if you're in a relationship with someone, unless you have some explanation as to how it happened, you're bound to repeat it, right? So you need to have an explanation of the cause, and thus you have a way of addressing that cause so it would reduce the likelihood of it happening again. Also, you're telling the victim, this is why it happened, and so trust me that I know why it happened and I know what to do to prevent it from happening again. Because a lot of people will say, I'm sorry for doing it, I'm never going to do it again, and then they do it again because they didn't think about why they did it. So you need to show your work, essentially, by explaining why it happened. Number 6 is to offer remedy if necessary and appropriate, right? So in this situation, I don't know if there could be a remedy exactly because you can't take it back, but say you keyed someone's car, for example. To offer remedy would be to pay for the repairs of the car. Number 7 is to provide a plan to address the cause of the transgression to reduce the chance of repeat transgressions, which I've already been over. In fact, 7 should probably follow 5. Number 8 is to request acknowledgement of each component if possible. So for Will Smith, he could actually have these different components as he provides it to Chris Rock. And it all has to be sincere. You understand? I'm not just providing this list as a way of having some methodical, fake way of doing it. It has to come from the heart. But this list gives you guidance as to what you need to hit on and maybe even what you need to prepare before you even say you're sorry, that you need to think about for a while, maybe in therapy. And so for Chris Rock, it would be something like, I'm sorry. Did you hear my apology? Does it make sense? I identified the slap as being a transgression upon you. Is that how you felt about it? I mean, it'd be obvious, but you don't want to just apologize and just move away. Like, job done, I apologize. Do you want to make sure, like, am I apologizing for the right thing? Do I have the harm that I did to you right? Do I not fully understand it? That kind of thing. And also number 9 is confirmation of accuracy. And number 10 is to request forgiveness. We don't always do this. We don't always have the luxury of asking for forgiveness. Forgiveness in a lot of situations means that you have effectively and satisfactorily apologized.
Why didn't you apologize to Chris in your acceptance speech? I was fogged out by that point. It's all fuzzy. I've reached out to Chris, and the message that came back is that he's not ready to talk, and when he is, he will reach out. So I will say to you, Chris, I apologize to you. My behavior was unacceptable.
Okay, so he's saying, I apologize, my behavior was unacceptable. Okay, that's the beginning. It's certainly definitive. He's saying there's nothing good about what I did. It sounds like he's implying there's no excuse for it, that kind of thing. Now, you might notice that in my 10 components, I don't include saying I'm sorry or I apologize. The reason for that is because, one, I don't think you need to say it. It's if you do all 10 things here and you don't say I'm sorry or I apologize, that's okay in my book. Now, you could say it if you wanted to. You're not barred from saying I apologize or I'm sorry. Some people will scrutinize those two words. They'll say you should say I'm sorry. You shouldn't say I apologize. It doesn't really matter. It matters what comes from the heart. It matters what's being communicated, or it matters what's being received by the other person. So just think about that. The other reason why I don't have it in my list is because when you have it in component lists, a lot of people will just zero in on that and focus on just saying I'm sorry without thinking about the other components.
And I'm here whenever you're ready to talk. I want to apologize to Chris's mother. I saw an interview that Chris's mother did, and that was one of the things about that moment. I just didn't realize, I wasn't thinking, but how many people got hurt in that moment.
Okay, so he moved pretty quickly away from Chris Rock. I hope he gets back to Chris, but he is now moving on to his mother, which is good. He's apologizing to her. He says the word harm. He says that I didn't recognize in that foggy moment that I would be harming other people. Well, I hope he gets back to Chris Rock, though, because that's the main person of concern here.
So I want to apologize to Chris's mother. I want to apologize to Chris's family, specifically Tony Rock. We had a great relationship. Tony Rock was my man, and this is probably irreparable.
Okay, so he's apologizing to the family and also Chris Rock's brother, and what I did might be irreparable, meaning that I did something so horrible that I wouldn't blame other people for never wanting to be my friend again in that family. Now, if none of this is sincere, then none of it matters, right? You have to be sincere. So do you think he's being sincere? I think he is. I'm sure he has a heart just like anyone else. I'm sure he has insecurities and defenses like anyone else, but I'm sure he has a heart that he cares and that he can tell right from wrong. And so I'm guessing he's really quite remorseful about it.
I spent the last 3 months replaying and understanding the nuances and the complexities of what happened in that moment. And I'm not going to try to unpack all of that right now.
Okay, that's good. I mean, this video isn't very long, so I'm glad that at least he mentions this, because that's the bulk of the apology. If I were Chris Rock, this is what I would want to hear. Okay, tell me all about that part. But anyway, so he says, for 3 months, I've been really thinking about the nuances as to why that happened. I'm going to take a guess and say that he is thinking about the triggers to his trauma. I don't know that. He also could be saying, I had beef with you, because there was some talk about that. Like, well, it's because you made that joke 10 years ago about my wife. And so that's on you. I don't know what is behind that explanation sentence there.
But I can say to all of you, there is no part of me that thinks that was the right way to behave in that moment. There's no part of me that thinks that's the optimal way to handle a feeling of disrespect or insults.
Okay, interesting. He's saying there's no part of me. I think he's really trying to emphasize that he doesn't have any part of himself that will make an excuse for it. Like, well, he deserved it in that moment. And then another part of him is like, no, he doesn't deserve it. He's saying my entire soul believes that that was wrong. But then he also adds in that he was disrespected. He is implying that Chris Rock was disrespectful to his wife or him or both. there's a lot that could be happening there. He could be going in a direction of, well, he was being disrespectful, and so he deserved for me to do something to him, but not that.
After Jada rolled her eyes, did she tell you to do something? No. It's like, I made a choice on my own, from my own experiences, from my history with Chris. Jada had nothing to do with it.
Okay, again, he mentions this history with Chris, which is interesting. I wonder if he still believes, and maybe there is a story behind that would somehow justify at least anger that he would feel towards Chris Rock. Obviously, he's saying it did not justify what I did, but he's also saying that, no, Jada didn't have anything to do with it. And yeah, there was a lot of talk about, because if you remember the exact sequence of the camera angles showing us, the audience, what was happening, Chris Rock says the joke, they show Will Smith laughing, and Jada is kind of going, ugh. She doesn't look happy. And Will Smith is laughing, and then the camera goes back to Chris Rock, and then we see Will Smith walking on stage. There's also a shot behind, like there were people filming from the audience. There's a lot of speculation that, well, of course, Jada pressured Will Smith because Will Smith laughs, and then there's all these people thinking, well, Jada looked and gave him the evil eye, or even said, you better do something about that. And then that's when because it did seem weird that Will Smith would laugh. He was just like full on laughing, and then the next thing you know, he's walking on stage and slapping him across the face. So it wasn't illogical for people to conclude that Jada actually influenced him in that moment. But given what I had seen from the various different angles, it seemed more likely that he looked at her, saw her disappointed face, and then he just got triggered and went up there. The Jada conspiracy theory, if you will, is based on this general notion, I don't know if it's true or not, it seems a little or a lot overblown, honestly, that Will Smith is a simp, or that he's weak and he's controlled by Jada, and that Jada does whatever she wants and cheats on him whenever she wants, and he's just sitting at home hoping that she'll love him. That's a very simplistic view. It obviously could be true, doesn't seem true to me, and it seems like a typical way that people will narrativize famous couples, a very simplistic, reductionistic way. So I think given that pocket of the internet that has that narrative about their relationship, when they saw the data, they just fit the data into their narrative and concluded that, well, Jada must have pressured him, must have looked at him and said, you better do something, and then that's when he did something.
I'm sorry, babe. I'm going to say sorry to my kids and my family for the heat that I brought on all of us. To all my fellow nominees, this is a community. It's like I won because you voted for me. And it really breaks my heart to have stolen and tarnished your moment.
Okay, so he's saying that he's sorry to other people at the ceremony, other nominees, because he's taking away from their moment. So let's look at the list. I don't know about accurately and fully, because we'd have to ask the victims, but he is acknowledging the transgression. He hasn't specifically said the slap, that I slapped Chris Rock. It's implied there, but he hasn't said it, and I think he probably should be explicit. If you're ever apologizing to your partner, you should really be clear and say, when I called you that bad name, or when I did not show up to pick you up. You don't want to say, I'm sorry for yesterday, because it feels like you're avoiding it. Another thing that I learned early in my career was when we apologize fully and accurately, we also really give ourselves a chance to see what happened, because we have an ego management system that will defend against things that we don't like about ourselves. And so we will minimize them or deny them or, push past them. But that denies us the opportunity to learn, to really fully acknowledge what happened. When we actually just sit with it and say, okay, I slapped Chris Rock. I went up on stage and I slapped him. I slapped him. No one else did that. I slapped. When you sit there and live in it, you give yourself a chance to really acknowledge who you are, a part of yourself, right? Now, you don't want to fall into shame and beat yourself up for 10 years. So he's acknowledging the transgression, I think. Number two, I don't know if he's accurately or fully, because we'd have to ask the victims, but he is acknowledging the harm caused. I don't know if he's fully describing the harm, though, particularly to Chris Rock. We had a very brief talk about Chris Rock, and now we're talking about everyone else. Because if I were Will Smith, I would say, I harmed you by interrupting your stand-up thing, and I ruined it for you. Two, I slapped you across the face for no reason because you were saying a fairly innocent joke about my wife. It hurt her feelings. I'm sure you didn't mean it that way, or maybe you did. I don't know. Either way, I slapped you across the face. That's violent crime. Like, it's horrible what I did. I danced at the after party and acted like everything was normal. I'm sorry I did that. So number three, take responsibility. I think he's taking responsibility. He's not blaming anyone else. Number four, sincerely express guilt, regret, shame, or remorse. Yeah, I mean, again, we'd have to ask Chris Rock and other people, but I think he is remorseful. I don't know. I think he definitely feels remorseful for these other people. I'm still not so sure if he feels remorse for what he did to Chris Rock. Remorse, just like self-mortification. You're just like, oh, I can't believe I did that. I think so, but I don't know.
I can still see Questlove's eyes. You know, it happened on Questlove's award, and you know, it's like I'm sorry really isn't sufficient.
Okay, so again, he's apologizing to Questlove and saying, I saw it in his face, and I could still see that, and it's not in the words he's using. You can just see the body language. It seems like he's quite sorrowful and remorseful. Now, I'm guessing a lot of people will say it's insincere because he knows he's being filmed and he's practiced this a lot. And there's also a camera kind of on a dolly or something. So it seems like there's a whole crew of people that are filming him right now. It's also, he's wearing, I don't know, but it looks like maybe his own merch as his hat, which is not a good look. People, I'm guessing, would accuse him of using the opportunity to promote his merch.
What would you say to the people who looked up to you before the slap, or people who expressed that you let them down? So there's two things. One, disappointing people is my central trauma. I hate when I let people down.
Okay, interesting. I'm glad he's actually talking in this language. He's saying, I hate letting people down. That's my central trauma. What does he mean by that? So is he referring to his childhood, believing that he was disappointing his mother by not being a more brave individual and fighting against his violent father? Is that what he's saying? Another aspect of this that I've talked about in previous videos is that he's disclosed in interviews that as he was writing his book around the age of 50, he decided for the very first time to come clean or to talk about the abuse that was going on in his family, because previously when he was asked about his parents, he said, my dad was the disciplinarian and he was very good at that, and my mom was the loving one and she was very good at that, and so I had the best of both worlds. So he was framing it in this very positive light, and maybe there's some truth to that, but it's not really the full truth, right? His dad was being violent with his mom. It sounds like in a very severe way. And so he decided to write about that in his book. And I was hypothesizing that he has never been through treatment around that. He's never gone through recovery, or maybe he was, and it was very raw for him as he was discussing this. Then as the book is about to be published, he starts going around, because it was a memoir, he starts going around to people that he has written about and explaining, look, I wrote about you in my book. Let's talk about it. Let's prepare you. I don't want you to just read about it. I want you to know from me before I publish it. And as a part of that process, he went to his mom and said, I'm writing about what happened, really, and about how I felt like I was a coward and how you actually got away from him eventually, I think when he was around 13 years old, and divorced him, moved out because of his violence. And he says in this interview, I had never talked with my mom about it in our entire life. So you just imagine, for you people who have gone through similar experiences, imagine that a lot of emotions would come up and a lot of raw parts of yourselves would be exposed. And then when Chris Rock around this time says this joke, you could imagine that raw nerve being exposed because he's writing about it and thinking about it and talking about it and processing those emotions, goes right to the heart. Whereas 5 years ago, if Chris Rock had made that joke, his defenses would have been more secure, more routine. Whereas as he starts to process, the defenses start to come down. But anyway, so he's talking about disappointment is my number one trauma. And for a lot of people who are in media have that drive of, one, I want to get people in the public to like me. And people will say that's narcissistic, but it can be for sure. But it isn't necessarily narcissistic personality disorder. It could just be you're just really interested in that. It's your art form. You know, if you're a musician or something, or a comedian, let's just say if you're a comedian, a big part of your self-esteem comes from people laughing, right? You get up on stage and you tell your jokes, people laugh. So the comedian comes off the stage and they're like, everyone was laughing. I feel good about myself now. And then another night, no one was laughing. I feel terrible about myself. I'm a terrible comic. You wouldn't look to that person and say you're narcissistic. You wouldn't say there's something wrong with you. You would just say, oh yeah, well, you're a comedian. Of course you care about people laughing at your jokes. That's the whole reason why you're doing it. You love your art, and that a big part of your art is that interactive process of joke, laugh, right? So it's a normal performer thing, and he's a performer. And so a big part of his drive probably has always been trying to appease the masses. The flip side of that coin is disappointing people or something negative, right? I mean, I have my trauma regarding this as well. He is talking about his flavor of the other side of that coin is disappointment. I think he's saying that to disclose and also to really say, yeah, I get it. Like, I do not take that lightly. The fact that I disappointed my fans is horrible to me. I think that's what he's saying.
So it hurts. It hurts me psychologically and emotionally to know I didn't live up to people's image and impression of me. And the work I'm trying to do is I am deeply remorseful. And I'm trying to be remorseful without being ashamed of myself.
Okay, so he said a few things. One, in the beginning, let's rewind that a little bit, because what he is talking about is in line with what I was saying earlier, but you could also interpret it as narcissism.
I hate when I let people down. So it hurts. It hurts me psychologically and emotionally to know I didn't live up to people's image and impression of me.
All right, so I think he's getting a little teary. He's feeling the feelings. It hurts me. Yeah, I think anyone can relate to that, right? Even if you're not a performer, to feel like you've let people down, to feel like you have disappointed others with your behavior. It hurts. And often people will try to deny that hurt, or they'll get angry, or they'll try to be a tough person. Like, I don't care about what anyone thinks. We all care about what other people think of us. In the same way that we all need water, and we all need food, and we need certain nutrients, we need love, and we need acceptance. And people that try to deny that, it's a paternalistic idea that we can somehow exist in a vacuum and isolate ourselves. It's just not true. Thousands of studies, science demonstrates that we are social creatures and we evolved to gain acceptance. The thinking is that in our early species, 150,000, 250,000 years ago, we were very vulnerable to a lot of things that could kill us. Predators. We also had the elements that could kill us, and starvation or lack of water. We depended on each other. We were extremely social creatures. And so we evolved to have a mechanism in our emotional structure that when we sense rejection, we feel tremendous pain and panic. And so it motivates us to gain acceptance from other people. So we're all like this. That doesn't make us narcissistic. And for some people who are raised in a certain way, they are pushed into a situation where they feel unacceptable or unlovable or something. And there's various different defensive structures that children will build to react to that and defend themselves against that. one of which is what we call narcissistic personality. And that involves depending on the self and also trying to be very impressive to other people, because we're trying to convince ourselves that we're acceptable and lovable by constantly getting it out there that we're an awesome human being. And you might do that by even trying to appear humble and trying to appear likable. You might not come across like you're better than other people, but you're always constantly trying to manage people's impression of you.
The work I'm trying to do is I am deeply remorseful, and I'm trying to be remorseful without being ashamed of myself.
Right. I don't know if that's a very good call to say right now in his introductory YouTube video that he's trying to take care of himself. I mean, if he were my client, I would say good, because actually a lot of bad things can happen if you start to beat yourself up, because what can happen is you fall into shame and you're just like, I'm a terrible human being. I'm a terrible human being. I can't believe I did that. I'm worthless. Everyone hates me. I'm worthless. I'm worthless. Well, to that self-flagellation, there often will be a defense to that internal abuse that you're doing to yourself. I mean, one, it's just unfair to do that to you all the time. But two, defenses will kick in, like denial or drinking a lot or pushing everyone away. And then your life really goes down the tubes. So yeah, he shouldn't be destroying himself in this process. And it's another reason why people avoid apologizing, because for them, it's black or white. They're either denying it and minimizing it and moving on with their life and saying, I don't care about what other people think of me, or they're falling into a deep pit of shame and depression that they can never pull out of. There's a middle zone or a third option, which is you're ashamed of yourself and you feel bad for what you did, but you still retain some level of security in yourself and some level of knowledge that, well, I'm mostly good. I did a bad thing. It was horrible. It was really horrible, but you know, I'm okay most of the time, and I can recognize that. So I think that's maybe what he's talking about. Is he in therapy? I don't know. I hope he is.
All right, I'm human. And I made a mistake, and I'm trying not to think of myself as a piece of shit. So I would say to those people, I know it was confusing. I know it was shocking. But I promise you, I am deeply devoted and committed to putting light and love and joy into the world.
Okay, what I think he's saying here is that he is deeply remorseful for what he did, so much so that he is starting to fall into a deep pit of shame and also thinking of himself as a piece of shit. So he's trying to demonstrate to people, yeah, I feel so bad about myself that I'm actually trying to pull back on the shame because I'm actually falling into a deep pit of despair. I would say that this, in my opinion, is on the good end of the spectrum regarding apologies, public apologies that people have been making. Now, it doesn't matter what I think about it. It matters what Chris Rock thinks about it and others that have been harmed by him directly. But in terms of a public apology, I would say that this is pretty good, because there's a lot of really horrible public apologies, which I actually plan on getting into. As a part of my deep dive series, I plan on reviewing famous public apologies and analyzing them in the same way that I'm doing right now.
And, you know, if you hang on, I promise we'll be able to be friends again.
Okay, so that's the end. He's saying, if you hang on, I promise we can be friends again. Well, that's kind of presumptuous, right? So that's the end of the video. Let's kind of rewatch it again, because I interrupted a lot, but let's rewatch it again a little bit.
Why didn't you apologize to Chris in your acceptance?
One thing I didn't mention is the way he reads these questions. It's so stilted, right? Presumably he's been preparing for this for a long time. There's a camera crew there, there's sound people there. So presumably this isn't just off the cuff, right? Is he trying to come across like this is spontaneous or something? Because I don't think it is. I guess people would assume he's been talking with multiple PR individuals around what should be done and when and how.
I was fogged out by that point. It's all fuzzy. I've reached out to Chris, and the message that came back is that he's not ready to talk, and when he is, he will reach out. So I will say to you, Chris, I apologize to you. My behavior was unacceptable, and I'm here whenever you're ready to talk. I want to apologize to Chris's mother.
Yeah, so that was the whole thing to Chris. Now, maybe Chris is like, I didn't need an apology. I don't care. Who cares? You know, who knows what Chris Rock thinks? But that was the entirety of his apology. He just says, I apologize. My behavior was unacceptable. Okay.
I spent the last 3 months replaying and understanding the nuances and the complexities of what happened in that moment. And I'm not going to try to unpack all of it.
It would be so much more satisfying to me as a viewer if he would have said something like, the complexities of my issues. But I don't know if that's what he thinks. Or is he talking about the complexities of his relationship with Chris Rock?
But at right now, but I can say to all of you, there is no part of me that thinks that was the right way to behave in that moment. There's no part of me.
Because there's a lot of people that were saying about him that he's not really remorseful and he's just saying he's sorry. He's not actually sorry. He doesn't care about any of this. And I think he's responding to those accusations like, no. There's no part of me that believes that's okay. I don't secretly believe that that's okay. And I'm just saying I'm sorry. I believe I was wrong. I think that's what he's saying.
To all my fellow nominees, you know, this is a community. It's like I won because you voted for me. And it really breaks my heart to have stolen and tarnished your moment. I can still see Questlove's eyes. You know, it happened on Questlove's.
Another hypothesis that I had, now that I'm remembering, is that he was nominated for King Richard, the movie, which depicts Venus and Serena Williams and their father, and how their father, Richard Williams, really had to fight for his daughters and really protect them. Although he shot the movie probably a couple years earlier, I don't know, he might be in that role as an actor. That's not a strong hypothesis. Of course, it wouldn't excuse it or explain it fully, because it's not like that's ever happened in the Oscars before, you know, like where Al Pacino after Scarface stands up and starts shooting everyone. You know, it's not like those kinds of things happen.
Disappointing people is my central trauma. I hate when I let people down. It hurts me psychologically and emotionally to know I didn't live up to people's image and impression of me. The work I'm trying to do is I am deeply remorseful. And I'm trying to be remorseful without being ashamed of myself, right? I'm human and I made a mistake. I'm trying not to think of myself as a piece of shit.
Another thing I'm thinking of right now after rewatching this clip is that when we're treated like a piece of crap, the way that I think he was growing up, you start to develop defenses against that try to compensate for that, right? It could be argued that that's what he was doing. He was feeling like, oh, I'm that piece of crap again because I'm watching someone abuse my loved one, and I'm a piece of crap because I let that happen. So my defense is to strike back, and I'm going to slap him across the face. And then, because you overreacted, now there is a reason, a legitimate reason, to believe that you're a piece of crap, because you have now caused so much people to hate you. And so many of our defenses will actually realize what we're trying to avoid. We might be trying to avoid rejection and loneliness. As a way of defending against that, we might only date people that are not ready for commitment, because, you know, if we get with someone who wants to commit to us, then we have to worry about saying yes to them and then having them pull the rug out from underneath us, and then we are hurt again. So we'll avoid people that are looking for commitments, and in the process of our defense against rejection, we're actually being attracted to people that inherently will reject us. And so our defense causes the problem. And so for him, it's possible that his defense against the humiliation or the cowardliness or the feeling that he's a disappointment actually caused him to have a million times more disappointment come at him.
Those people, I know it was confusing. I know it was shocking. But I promise you I am deeply devoted and committed to putting light and love and joy into the world. If you hang on, I promise we'll be able to be friends again.
Is that his way of saying, let's start making content? Because, you know, he doesn't just act in movies. He also does a lot of stuff on YouTube. Is he saying, I, regardless of what I did, plan on still trying to put love out into the world in a public way and possibly getting people to like me again? We will be friends again, I promise you. Please. Maybe he's pleading or something. I don't know. So yeah, interesting. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I will be doing other videos like this, and I'm also still working on my deep dive that will be available to patrons only. So look for that. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. And give good apologies because we all deserve that. We really, really do.